talk about chapter 45, which is titled Vox Ignis. So we'll just get straight into it, grab your coffees, and let's go. So, the music. Um, I think it was back in January, February, very beginning of this year. Um, saw this band that I used to listen to, like straight out of college sort of thing, called See You Next Tuesday. Um, they were this deathcore, really to me, they were more a grindcore band. Um, but they, broke up years and years and years ago. And I um, saw one Friday night, that they had gotten back together and released a new album. Um, so, you know, I went online, listened to it, streamed it, or whatever right after it came out. And, like it was decent enough. Whatever. Like, don't want to. I don't want to diss them or anything, Not that they're going to see this, but was it like the greatest thing? Was it a nice throwback? Sure, you know. But in listening to the album, I came across this one song on it called "I'll Never Smile Again," and it's a relatively short song. Um, Starts out real grindcore for I don't know, like 5, 6, 7 seconds. Like it starts real quick and then it goes into this really weird um, guitar arpeggio. Just what struck me about the song was the particular guitar tone that they used on it. Like I'm not exactly sure what they did with it, if it was just a little bit of fuzz or distortion and just like a really kind of weird EQ setting for whatever amp or like plug-in uh, that they were DIing or whatever. I don't know. It just, all I can say is it just struck me as odd, but like in a really good way. And meanwhile, like they play through like the song, the first 6, 7 seconds is just straight blast beat, grindcore sort of thing, and then goes into just guitar with this really strange guitar line. They play it a number of measures, I guess, and then the rest of the band comes back in with the vocalist, I guess, screaming at the top of his lungs, and bass comes in with this, weird kind of slotty sort of thing. Drummers doing his thing, not blast beats, but playing these weird, kind of I would say more jazz inspired like syncopations. And I'm not gonna say like they reinvented the wheel with that. I think that sort of thing has been done before, but at the same time they put a spin on it that was really kind of refreshing. Unfortunately, that section only lasts like 50 seconds and then they go into this kind of um, I guess, monotone, sort of rhythmic, slow kind of breakdown thing that sort of lasts the rest of the song, another minute or whatever. And anyway, I mention this because that song, and especially that just weird, clangy kind of guitar part that they were doing, directly inspired this song. It's happened plenty of times before. Converge, or one of the guitar lines in the second track, the Alture and the Oval Table. I was listening to this band called Cassiopeia, um, way, way, way back in the day. And, one of the sections in that song was directly inspired by them. So, I mean, I just love finding, inspiration from other songs, and not not copying it per se, but I mean, is it kind of a rip off? Well, sure, I guess, but I mean, I've listened to enough interviews from different bands I love that pretty much everybody does that. Everybody finds some band, some song that they're like, yeah, that right there is awesome. You know, want to write some music, and they just use that as inspiration. Maybe recycle the drum line or the rhythm or whatever. But for me, it's, you sort of, when you find inspiration like that and you kind of rip off, it's not necessarily that I want to play the exact same thing. It may be a similar rhythm, but really, when you're kind of ripping off a rhythm like that, it's more about ripping off the vibe or the feel of the song. Because when I listen to this song, I'll Never Smile Again, it just, it was the feeling of it that struck me, like the tonality and the sound that obviously struck me, like I said. But when you put it all together, it's some people be like, well, it's all about the groove, but it's maybe a little more than that. It's the groove, but how it makes you feel. um, and this particular song was kind of puts you at dis-ease. um, but like, as weird as this may sound, like, in a good way. Something puts you at dis-ease, but you're you're like, well, this is kind of good. Like, it's a good thing. I don't know how to explain it without sounding really weird, but if anything, it's a dis-ease, and it makes you kind of more alert, heightened kind of state of being aware of your surroundings, of just kind of recognizing, hey, wait a second, something isn't quite right. But it's coming to, like, that realization that something is off, that is actually a good thing. And I wanted to do something similar with this song. But you know, unlike the "See You Next Tuesday" song, you know, the blast beat grindcore sort of thing that they did only lasted like 56, not even that. Um, excuse me. It only lasted like a few seconds, and I wanted to do the opposite, and you know, it's like 50 seconds. The first minute, you know, just blast beats and playing these, you know, heavy guitar lines, sort of thing. Um, you know, I wanted to do something different with how this song sets up. Um, and, you know, I came up with, you know, my own weird guitar tone for, you know, that section of the song. And, you know, did slides on bass and just tried to play loose. Um, was kind of how I went into that. Just play real loose and kind of imprecise, but that gets into like the groove and the feel of things. Meanwhile, you know, the drums that I wrote were just doing their own thing. You know, I always respect when a drummer does something more like jazz influenced and just weird beats that obviously are on time, but you know, um, he's just sort of going all over the place, and it's almost like in this song and in the "See You Next Tuesday" song too. It's like the guitar line is what's actually keeping, you know, the rhythm of it, the beat. Meanwhile, like, yes, a drummer's playing along with that rhythm, but in syncopation, it's almost like the drums itself become like a sort of solo to itself. And then, you know, for that section, wasn't exactly sure what to do with the, you know, hard panned guitar left and right. So it's just like, well, let's keep it simple and, you know, do something a little more experimental, which, you know, doing these like feedback loops with echo effects and just turning knobs and messing around with the actual timing of the echo to achieve these, you know, feedback loops, you know, is something that's been around since, God, maybe since the Beatles, maybe. But, you know, that's a particular sound that I've just never really messed around with. Um, but, you know, on this song, I did that for that section because it kind of becomes part of that chaos that's going on. Like you're controlling it, but also it sort of does what it wants to do, tonally speaking. So that's that's really the main things that I want to point out with the music of this song. So getting into, you know, the story now and, you know, the literal meaning. Um, the speakers within this song, it's primarily the Black Knight speaking. Like we've heard from him, but you know, in previous songs, obviously. But this one really is meant to give spotlight on him, particularly. But we also have the protagonist speaking, we have Eugene speaking, and then we have a prisoner number one and a prisoner number two, just, these tertiary side characters. I like to think that prisoner one and two are members of the tribe or the the church that's been formed, but they're just off in the background, sort of doing their own thing, and we hear really just one line from them in this song, um, joining in what's going on in that moment. So the literal meaning for the story is that, where we left off at the end of last song, protagonist finds that Aurora is dead, and he sees it on the television, and that she is dead because, this revolution, this war has come into the city outside the prison, and you know all this violence is just happening there. That the war, the revolution, that's spoken of way back in volume one, has made its way to this exact place, but it's now become more violent. The ante's been raised. So with that, it's on the outside, even in volume four, the, I guess, precursor to the revolution is there, and the protagonist watches it, from windows or whatever. But what happens in Vox Ignis is that this revolution, this war, infiltrates the actual prison they're in. So what happens is the masses of the prisoners begin taking over, seizing guards. It becomes an all-out prison riot. And this is specifically outlined by Eugene over a loudspeaker, which that gets into, that weird guitar section, like a minute into this song. That's Eugene speaking, and he's letting every prisoner know, look, this revolution is now inside the prison, so now is the time to seize the day. This is the time where we fight back. This is the time when we gain our own freedom. This is the time when, we show no mercy, no quarter. And so that's what happens. But the protagonist, having just seen that, the woman he loves is now dead, and there's nothing, he can do or could have done about it, he's basically just panicking, just completely panicking and losing his shit. The Black Knight is, right there with him, and recognizes that, call it pattern recognition, but the Black Knight realizes that, something's happening right now, and it's not just a prison riot or whatever, but something is wrong with the protagonist. And so he grabs the protagonist and says, basically, come with me. Like, I know something's wrong. You've got to, like, find some solace right now. You've got to recenter yourself, or whatever you want to call it. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is to not be around all this other stuff that's happening around us. And so they go off to a more secluded area of the prison, whether it's just a random room somewhere, whether it's the church sanctuary. They return to that from this area where, these large TV sets are. Um, I don't think that the particular location within the prison matters in this context, only that they retreat into solitude. Meanwhile, this prison riot slash revolution is going on. And in that, both of them are refusing to be a part of what's happening. And in this way, it's the Black Knight who is protecting the protagonist in doing this. Does he battle other prisoners while they're in transit into solitude? Maybe, maybe not. That detail to me doesn't really matter. If he's, pushing his way into the crowd, pushing people aside or whatever, that's fine. If somebody comes after the protagonist while he's walking along and the Black Knight punches him in the face or something, that's fine. But that particular detail, it just doesn't matter. This is more about the Black Knight is emotionally protecting the protagonist by, like, pulling him aside and leading him towards someplace safe. Someplace to basically catch his breath. Meanwhile, maybe they spot some of their fellow tribesmen, rioting and ceding to the, violence of the mob, and to what Eugene is, encouraging everybody to get involved in. So once they're alone and in solitude together, I guess you could say that, like, the protagonist explains what just happened and Aurora and everything. I think that's more something that can be assumed. It's not necessarily, like, recycled from the protagonist. Like, that, you'd say that, like, part happens sort of off panel, so to speak. We don't, or, at the very beginning, the protagonist is shouting all this stuff and saying, that she's basically dead, and that, he's failed her, and stuff like that. So, I mean, that can be assumed, that, the Black Knight becomes in the know of what's happened. And, you got to think in mind that from the protagonist standpoint, the end of volume 1 and beginning of volume 2 is the last time he's seen Aurora, right? But remember that in, her waking up from sleep, was essentially what caused him to be taken by these authorities and placed in the prison to begin with, and that she was the one person on the outside who could have defended his honor or whatever, and explained that like he's not a witch or whatever. But it's not just that like he loves her, but now she's also dead, and she was the very reason why he was, initially put in the prison to begin with. So obviously, like, he's having a tough time. But like once all of this is known to the Black Knight makes the decision to be vulnerable with the protagonist. And the thing is, the the Black Knight has not been vulnerable with anybody. Keep in mind, the Black Knight is this massive, massive figure in this full, like, medieval armor sort of thing. He's massive, and he's hella strong, um, extremely strong. Think like Iron Man, or something just like superhero level strength and stamina, and just this huge imposing figure. But the Black Knight, for the first time with at least anybody within the tribe, he decides to open up the armor and to show who he is underneath it all. And whether the armor is technologically based or whether it's some sort of magical sort of thing doesn't matter. What he does is he opens up the armor and reveals that he's basically the size of like a small boy. And this isn't like some like baby or something like that in the armor. This is a grown man that has had some sort of stunted growth. Whether it's like some sort of genetic disorder or some sort of, I don't know what the politically correct term would be for it, but that's what's going on. And so he reveals who he really is to the protagonist in this moment of vulnerability, because in opening up his armor, if the protagonist just wanted to wail on him, like, the protagonist could easily kill the Black Knight. But the Black Knight chooses to reveal his true self to the protagonist and admit how weak he truly is, and yet in this like emotional fortitude comes to the conclusion that everything that's going on, this riot, this revolution, is to a degree and to a scale that he just doesn't agree with, and that he's willing to actually revolt against the violence of the revolution in this, I guess, solidarity, that he's willing to just not go along with the crowd and thus rebel. So that's the literal meaning. Onto the fruit of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit that I put in this song is gentleness, and once again, the message rewords it as not needing to force our way in life. Um, so I mean, yeah, not choosing not to be forceful is one way of putting it. And so the amoral step that I came up with is disregard for property, or rather the enjoyment of wanton destruction. And that's pretty much what they're seeing around them, as this like revolt takes place. So now on to the personal meaning of the song. This song, and I've talked about this subject ever since Volume 1. It's permeated, pretty much every album so far. The idea of, the culture war. um, for me, this song kind of represents how one of the fronts of the so-called culture war was drawn with the pandemic coming about, and how leftists especially fought back. And I'm saying that with knowing full well that I've got two or three very, very, very close friends of mine who are like very leftist, potentially, watching this. And, I don't want to offend anybody in saying this stuff, yet this is stuff that I personally believe. And the way that the sides were drawn, and things became even more divided through the pandemic, it's just, I didn't like it at all. And I've already said that, I guess, like with stuff in Volume 4. But what really got me wasn't, I mean, initially it's like, okay, people are saying this and people are saying that, and that's crazy talk to me. But like over time, I started to realize that what really bothered me was how so many people wanted to control how others think in the process of these sides being drawn. That it was groupthink, sure, but just on an individual level, the need, the want to control others' very thinking. And so then there was, the rise of deconstructionism. Um, and I think I've already said this previously, so I'll repeat myself, I suppose. This isn't against like the idea of protesting or anything like that, because I'm a firm believer for civil disobedience. For example, during the BLM protests and George Floyd and all that, here in my own city, I remember seeing video, from not very far from where I work of a guy peacefully sitting on top of a downtown statue and being pulled away by law enforcement, you know, on like basically a fire truck ladder. Guy was like sitting up there in I don't know, jeans or shorts or something, no shirt on. He's just sitting there kind of cross-legged, and I saw that and I was like, he's doing it right. Like that's the kind of protest that I like to see. Just whoever that guy is, you know, I at least applaud him for that. That idea of civil disobedience. I'm 100% for that. Um, but then, you know, in contrast, you see these videos of, you know, some old white guy during the BLM protests was trying to pull up to a gas pump. Um, and all these protesters were outside this gas station, and they start beating on his car and rocking it violently to some old white dude just trying to get gas. And that sort of thing I can't get behind. It bothered me, the immediacy of you must choose your side right here and right now, and that it was viewed as not okay to stand back and say, you know, I don't want any part of either side of this. I want to actually take time to think this through or do my own research, and that this itself is privilege. To, you know, like taking a step back was seen as like, oh, that's just white privilege, or just privilege in general. And it's like, no, no, like that to me is wisdom. Uh, you know, when you're not exactly sure, when there's such a divide, and being able to retreat into solitude and look at things from all angles and try to come up with your own decision of what to think, to, you know, actually be an individual when everyone is calling for you to be a part of a collective is, it's just, that sort of thing just really bothered me. And the idea of this being like a privilege, you know, no. Privileges can be taken away, but I see this as a natural right. The right to solitude, the right to think for yourself and come up with your own decision, and the right to have time to do so and not be just, oh, we have to do this right now, and if you're not for us, then you're automatically against us. Like that kind of groupthink is just, I'm against it. Like straight up, I despise that, and that's from any side, any angle. I just can't get behind that. Um, and the thing is, you know, what happened to George Floyd was wrong. As I've stated previously, um, you know, I only watched the video once, and it just, like, it's rough. Um, you know, just very difficult to watch. But despite that, every person has the right to choose to take a step back and take as much time as needed to be able to process that kind of information and come up with, their own personal consensus, and not be socially pressured to like go out marching in the streets. Um, that's just what I personally believe, whether you do or not. Like, sorry, that's just not going to change for me.